Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be reading my journey from software engineering to entrepreneurship and back again. Of course, the alternate title of this is There and Back Again, A Technomancer's Tale. My entrepreneurship journey. So over the years, I've had lots of side projects. Primary school, I made school newspapers, and I think we tried to sell them for like 5 cents or something like that. We planned and designed a trading card game that never really turned into cards, but we definitely used quite a lot of paper for this. In high school, I started lots of websites, including the first version of this blog. The first website I ever made, I think, was like Gamer Gadget, and I would try to like review video games and use like affiliate links for Amazon sites and stuff like that. I made a video game walkthrough YouTube channel, which is actually my personal YouTube channel, which you can look up. It's linked in my projects page. It just has a bunch of walkthroughs for like mobile games. I tried to code some games, resold a lot of things online, especially like my old PS1 games. And then in college, I got into like creative coding, art, and explored little tech projects. Wasn't really selling anything during this time, but was definitely exploring a lot of little side projects. And then professionally over the past several years, just continue building projects from creative coding to productivity apps to mobile games, clothing collections, things like that. So lots of different kinds of side projects over the years. And since 2016, I've worked professionally as a software engineer. This allowed me to learn about software in the real world beyond the ancient practices of academia. I have a running hypothesis that academia is always 10-ish years behind the industry or the real world. I don't know why this is, but I think it might just be that teachers and stuff, they're teaching the thing that they experienced in the real world, but they've left the stream of like continuing, progress. And so they're just teaching the thing that was best practice when they left. But if they're teaching for 10 years, then that thing is like 10 years old. I think that's why it is. I don't know. I think it's probably something we should fix, but education's hard. On the side, I continued to build my side projects with the idea that I would eventually do this full time as part of my endless game. Kind of like my retirement hobby. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's basically like, some people are like, when I get enough money, I'm going to play golf or something like that. Or when I get enough money, I'm going to go camping and hiking all the time. My thing is like building more projects. It's always kind of been that. You can see kind of like a big list of projects that have links to and stuff here at this link. But I've come to the conclusion that waiting on artificial reasons to do the things you want is rarely an optimal strategy. In the best case, you've robbed yourself of years of higher quality of life with that thing. And in the worst, you realize that the thing you want is not actually what you want. And again, have robbed yourself of years doing something you actually want by blindly chasing that false dream. So in late 2022, I quit my job as a software engineer at Instagram to pursue entrepreneurship full time. This was a good time in my life to make this change as I was feeling bored and uninspired and pretty stagnant at work, having been in the same or similar role for around 3 years. Morale was low due to layoffs, and stocks were low / I was nearing the end of my optimal 4-year vest schedule. And yeah, currently I've really only been at companies for around 3.5 years max. And I feel like I always hit this kind of plateau. Like you first come into a company and you're like learning a lot. Like you learn so much, you're not very good at your job because there's so much to learn. Like you don't know everything. And probably for the first 6 months, it's like a lot of ramp up and like a little bit of impact. And then you start kind of going on this curve where like you're learning less, but you know more. So you have like a lot of impact. And then by I think year 2, you're like, you've learned most things and you're like landing a lot of impact. But I think by year like 3.5, if you're not like switching teams and at least getting some sorts of like new bumps and learning, like you're landing probably the most impact you've ever had at the company. But it's also, you're not growing as much as a person or in your career. And so that's kind of like a trade-off you have to make over like you're landing short-term impact for this one company, but is this the best long-term thing for you? And that's kind of where I was at this time. Another big thing is this 4-year vest schedule. If you're not, read up on like how a lot of these big tech companies do stuff, it's a lot of equity. And then a lot of times you get a upfront equity that vests over 4 years, but then over those 4 years, you also get a little bit of a refresher. But this means that after those first 4 years, oftentimes you'll like make more and more and more, and then you'll like make a lot less. And so I was nearing that time. So it's basically like I would be doing more and better work than I was just 3 months before, but I would get paid way less to do that same work. And so that's kind of another thing where it's like, you got to strategize about that. And maybe if you leave to go to another company, you actually just get paid more for the work that you're doing, the same work. So a lot of different kind of factors around here that made me kind of feel like it was maybe time for a change. Now, quick aside, this will probably be pretty long. The stocks then, of course, proceeded to skyrocket for Meta. So, if I'd stayed, I probably would have made, more money just due to the market. But timing the market is very hard and probably impossible, although I still think it's possible, just no one's figured it out yet. So I always caution people to not equate their market outcomes with their evaluation of themselves. I'm into finance a lot, and people often will ask me about like savings rates and stuff and whether they should factor the market in. And it's kind of like you can't control the market. So like over like 5 years, yeah, you should, look at your strategy, I suppose. But like within 1 year, like it's not your fault the housing market crashed. So like that's not really something you can control. You should really focus on like what you're doing, the kind of inputs you're having, and those outcomes. And so you can only really judge yourself on the decisions you made based on the information available to you at the time, which is not the market. And so timing the market is basically never a good decision. So just do index funds. Bigger write-up here. The reason I'm telling this to people is I think a lot of people get this wrong, and it's like really important for everyone to get their finances right. And for the purposes of this story, money is not the point. So yes, this kind of sucked on my side, but like money wasn't the object. Okay, back to the story. So I ended up joining Reddit as a software engineer. I left Instagram, ended up joining Reddit. I felt this was a good fit because it balanced my want to explore entrepreneurship with my utter inexperience actually doing that. I felt experience at a startup would give me my firsthand experience about how things actually work, while giving me a safety net via regular job and paycheck, and of course, health insurance, and allowing me to leverage my strengths, which was working as a software engineer. But I quickly realized that this was also not the right fit for me for my current life phase. What I wanted was to experience a startup, but what I got was a scale-up trying to refactor itself out of a decade of technical debt using industry enterprise best practices, read academic best practices, with a very corporate and hierarchical leadership structure. Reddit was purchased by Condé Nast in 2006, and while independent, there seemed to be some influences. Now, this is not to rag on Reddit. I love the product, and my team is full of wonderful people, but this was simply a bad personal fit for me at that time. They were doing what they felt was right for Reddit and its goals, but that structure didn't allow me to do my best work and wouldn't grow me in the areas I wanted. In 2023, I quit my job as a software engineer at Reddit, trying entrepreneurship full-time. Now, this was not a very good time to be jobless as a software engineer. The software engineering market was quite cold, probably the coldest I've ever seen it since graduating. So kind of a scary time for a lot of people. Money was not free anymore for companies big and small because interest rates on loans increased, so hiring was down and layoffs were up. And we've seen that continue throughout all of 2023 really, and probably will affect the market through 2024. But I'm just a guy on the internet, not financial advice, all that jazz. Now, this wasn't much of an issue for me. My goal was not to get a job, but to explore entrepreneurship. Plus, I'd already tried the join a startup and get experience route, and it didn't really work out for me. So I put in a few applications to some small startups that I thought were promising and tried something else in the meantime, building my own companies. I attempted this for several months. I started building several projects, and you can see a list of some of these here. I launched a few small things, but none of those really made money or got much interest from people externally. And then internally, I felt I wasn't really into building these things right now. I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't excited about it. So I mostly stopped. I felt a bit burnt out and uninterested in kind of pursuing this like building thing, this kind of entrepreneurial thing, even though that was what I'd kind of planned my, the rest of my year around. And I think it's because I had this like nagging feeling that my efforts weren't aligned with my values. So I felt like if I put a lot of effort into this thing, it wasn't actually getting me to where I wanted to go, but I wasn't sure why because, logically it seemed like it would. And so this made me feel like any extra effort expended here was actually just kind of useless. Now, I'll caveat that I don't really know how to build companies and startups. I've still never done it successfully, though I've taken many stabs at it. If I had to point out what likely led me to failure during this time, it's probably these 3 things, which we'll kind of touch on later. So I didn't build things people want. So I was building things, but would launch it, no interest, no good feedback. So it's like kind of died. I didn't have an idea that I was super excited to work on. So I was kind of like building these little things and kind of shipping them. But I wasn't that excited about it, and so it kind of like didn't come out that well, and then nobody wanted it because it wasn't really something people wanted anyway, so it's kind of like this negative feedback loop of like not going well. And I also just didn't really do enough iterations. I didn't try enough things that one might hit. I didn't, even iterating on one thing to make it really good, didn't do that. And I think all these just kind of led to pretty subpar outputs that like are pretty obvious they didn't work out well. So after stopping building, I was mostly idle. I played a lot of video games during this time though, so happy about that. But play video games for long enough, like I think it kind of gets boring. I think this is why I don't like agree with people's, when I retire, I'm going to do this thing. I'm like, you could do that, but like, have you ever tried doing that full time? Like, it's probably just a hobby for you. So going anything more than like 1 or 2 times a week is like not great. Same with video games. I love doing it at night, whatever, but as soon as you're doing it like 5 days a week, it's like, this is boring. So anyway, I was mostly idle doing lots of useless things, but I did manage to read, watch, and consume many books, videos, and courses around solopreneurship and indie hacking. I also started participating in communities a lot more on Twitter, Reddit, and indie hackers. I'd never really been a participant in Reddit, but after joining Reddit, I felt like I should try more. And so I started like commenting and stuff, and it's actually a really great community space. I think Twitter's the best currently for conversations with like people on the internet, but I think Reddit is the best for what I can call discussions, kind of like really diving into different topics with other people. And what I think their edge is yes, they have their little community things, but I actually think it's the way that they deal with comments, the ability to thread and have nested threads, and the way that appears and how you can kind of like minimize, maximize, link into threads, get notifications and stuff. That is their edge there. I think, I guess I'll just go off on a rant here. I think every other conversation or messaging or forum app is like way behind there, but this is not really a moat. I think everyone should have this. Slack should have this. They're broken without it. Discord should have this. Their threads are too hidden. Twitter should have this, but their threads are like full of ads and they're hard to like navigate. Everything going forward, every messaging app should have this. So hopefully everyone just, pulls that feature out and uses it for themselves. But anyway, I started, participating in these communities a lot more, kind of discussing things. So learning about it, but also trying to, meet people who are actually doing the thing. So getting away from like the academia of like selling courses or watching videos or whatever, and like who is actually doing this and what are their outcomes. And so over time, I built up a mental model of what it would take to be successful as a solopreneur or an indie hacker, and also what success actually looked like in this domain. Ultimately, comparing the ideal or happy path of an entrepreneur with where I wanted to go led me to decide that this wasn't the path for me. And so here's what I learned. Entrepreneurship isn't for me. And aside, so this section is an excerpt from my 2023 H1 review, which I first wrote way back in July. And so I've edited it a little bit to kind of make more sense as part of this standalone post, but it's mostly from that time. So what I found was that most entrepreneurial successes required lots of work over lots of years with relatively low return on investment, with most successes coming out to about $200,000 a year, and often have lots of ongoing costs before actually breaking even. Now, I'll note that $200,000 a year is a lot of money, but perhaps less so when you consider that the company likely has costs not reflected there. So this often is like kind of revenue coming in, but we got to really think about profits. And so if you have a lot of costs involved, like other employees that are helping you out, or your compute costs, or, if you're a physical startup, maybe it's like infrastructure, packaging, shipping, things like that. So it's a lot of money, but when you detract all that, often it gets to be quite a lot less that's actually like take-home money. There's often a long period of no income. So when you're still building up the revenue stream, like who's paying for the expenses there? Yeah, you could go raise money, but a lot of these solopreneurs, entrepreneurs are paying it out of pocket or doing like a family and friends round kind of thing. And during that time, you still have to pay for, yes, your personal expenses. So your income may be small or often negative for a few years. But on top of that, right, like, one of the big things that we talk about in personal finance, and one of the reasons I linked to that post earlier of how I think of personal finance and building wealth, is that there's the time cost of money, the time value of money. And so, $1,000 10, 15 years ago often is worth like $2,000 today. And so when you're losing out on this time, especially when you're going negative, you're not building the compounding over time. And that really, really hurts your median outcomes over your life. So those are all things. And then the other thing to realize is that those are the success cases, right? Those are when people play the game and they come out with a positive outcome. But the thing is that the chances of a success outcome are actually quite low. And so when we think of like, what is expected value? It's your expected outcome times the chances of those things. So we've seen success. This is how big it is. But we have a small chance of it. So now our expected value is actually much lower than that, because we have to weight it against all the ones that actually fail to do this. And so here's a tweet I have that's like, this is like a real indie hacker that I thought this was very illustrative of like what a success actually looks like for real people, like not the standouts like Elon Musk, etc., but like actual indie hackers doing this thing. And so my tweet goes, "This is often what success looks like in the entrepreneurial world. It is a good outcome, but this journey is not for everyone. Same way not everyone wants 12 plus years of school to be a doctor. Some people just want to get a steady paycheck and live their lives, also success." And so this guy's tweet is, here's my bootstrapping journey. And from 2008 to 2018, so 10 years, made $0. Okay? And then between 2019 and 2022 was able to build revenue up to about $300,000 ARR, which is great. That's really great. But remember, this is revenue. So probably the profits are much lower. And then if you actually amortize that over the, 14 years that he was doing this, it's much lower, kind of like the yearly pay for this. And the bootstrappers thing is, in short, don't give up. But I'm kind of like, maybe just don't play this game is kind of my takeaway from this. If you don't want that success, you don't want to put in the work, it's not worth the ROI, maybe play a different game. And I have a running hypothesis, I probably need a separate post about this because this is already getting quite long, is that the push and glorification of entrepreneurs today is kind of like how people used to push being a doctor or a lawyer. They're like, go do this and it's going to be great. But we know that the doctor-lawyer thing is kind of like it's a joke now. It's like, oh gosh, nobody actually wants to do that. It's so much work. And then if you don't end up liking it, you've wasted so many years. And then even if you do it, like you're working a lot of hours and yeah, the pay is good, but is it worth it? Is it worth your life? And kind of it's like, no. Yet we're still basically doing the same thing with the glorification of entrepreneurship today. Now, I'm not bashing entrepreneurship or those who do it full time. If anything, I'm actually more impressed with those who have done it and succeeded. But what I am saying is that it's not the holy grail of careers any more than any other career is. And the same way that being a doctor or a lawyer does not set you up for success, it's a lot of work and it's just not for everybody. It comes with its own rules, its own meta, and risks, costs for participating. I think it warrants saying because I think it's too often placed on a pedestal without warning labels, along with its wall of heroes, Elon, Zuck, and levels. And so we see all these like outliers, if you will, that make like crazy outcomes. But the odds are you're not the outlier. You're not going to win the lottery. And so we got to shift our focus away from, the 0.0000001% and to what does the P50 look like? What is the median person who goes into this pursuit, this effort, this career? What is their outcome? So another tweet that's relevant to this is summarizing my thoughts on grind culture. It's less about the thing you choose to do, but how you choose to do it. It applies to any number of pursuits. So corporate ladder climbing, entrepreneurship or solopreneurship, schooling or hobbies. And the takeaway is to don't forget the journey. And so the idea here, this is the midwit meme, which is, usually more of a journey, is like the dumb guy on the left, he's working 30 hours a week. He's got some money to pay the bills, but that's kind of it. Now, the mid person that's really trying to optimize for things, whether this is like school, this is their hobby, this is, building their own company, this is just working really hard to climb the corporate ladder. They're trying to grind right now. So they're putting in, 60 hours a week. They're kind of doing everything. They're the hero on the team. They're working nights and weekends to get the launch done. They're skipping social events. Because it'll get in the way, or they, don't have social battery for it because they're drained. And they're kind of like, it'll be worth it in the end. And to a lot of people, that's currently where they're at in their journey, where it's like, this is the optimal thing. But I think over time, when you look at people like who made it, like what do people who are like very rich or are more kind of like actually happy in their life, like what they're kind of living their rich life, their wealthy life, as Ramit Sethi would say, is they kind of like will turn it down. They're like, wait, life isn't about working all the time or the success I might have in the future. It's actually just kind of like enjoying the life that I have right now. So often they'll try to turn it down. So I don't want to work 60 hours a week. In fact, I'll do a lot of things to make sure that I'm working 40 hours or less a week. And I'll just get money to do the things that I like to do. And I don't need to like be a super billionaire. Like that's not actually that helpful to me because I'm already living the life that I want to right now. And I think we forget this, but I think it can really happen in kind of any pursuit. Obviously here we're talking more about entrepreneurship, maybe a little about like, working, but I think it really can happen in schooling or hobbies or anything. You can get super focused on things and like not think of things holistically. And I'll call out for some, this is the way, but for me, it's not, at least not full time with respect to entrepreneurship. And I think it's for several reasons, but some of the, top factors are here. So first is risk. I'm a very risk-averse person. I like time to be on my side. Entrepreneurship often has a low, medium outcome. And if you want to dive into this kind of thing, you can look up the term ergodicity. I think it's fascinating, but way outside the scope of this video. And there are ways to fight against this with small bets. But the median is the median, and I have better median options. And so when you play a game, you have to think about what is the median outcome, because that, for most people, is what the outcome is most likely to be. And so if I play this game, I want to make sure that my most likely outcomes are good, and I just have better ways to do that. The next is work I like. So I like creation and ownership and autonomy. And in theory, entrepreneurship allows you to do a lot of these things. But in practice, you're often forced to wear many hats that maybe you don't want to. So these could be things like, I'm a software engineer, I like building technology. But to get a business to succeed, often you got to do things like marketing and sales and customer support, maybe fundraising, networking, like all sorts of things that like nobody else is doing because it's just you. So you kind of have to do that if that's the bottleneck to succeeding, which often at least one of these are. No, I think these are all great skills to have and things I would like to improve on over time, but probably not ever at the levels often required to run a full business successfully. I have accepted I really never want to be a CEO. I probably don't ever want to be a CTO either, because they have levels of these things that I don't actually like doing. For others, they might like doing this, so it's probably a better fit for them, but not for me. And I always think it's funny when people say that like you get more, autonomy and ownership as an entrepreneur, but here's the running joke on solopreneurship, indie hackers, even just like small stage companies, is basically that you quit your job so that you're your own boss, but you end up trading your one boss for dozens or hundreds or even thousands, if you're like B2C, of demanding bosses, each threatening to charge back their $20. I don't think you've ever had a more demanding boss than the people that paid you a little bit of money and want you to do something about it. The next bucket is freedom. And I thought about this a lot. So like, what is freedom? Doing what you like when you'd like to, or being able to take a full day off with no worries? I see how some entrepreneurs give themselves room to be free, to take a Wednesday off and do nothing. But I also see a large swath who constantly worry about the next thing, and even when they could take off, decide to pour more time into their business. I have a pretty obsessive personality. I'm not totally sure I could stop myself from overworking or being on all the time if I'm the thing in the way of doing more. If there's ever a thing where I could just do one more and it leads to, more outcomes, it's kind of hard to stop because you're like, oh, maybe it's worth it. But is that what life is about, doing one more? Probably not. Now, not all of these apply to everyone, and I know there are entrepreneurs who have found good balances for themselves. For me personally right now, I don't think this is the best hand I have to play, so I'm just choosing something else. So here's another tweet that was going around the indie hackers community. It's basically the matrix thing. So you got the red pill, the blue pill, and it's like low pay or insane pressure, like which one you want. And then the indie hacker is Neo, and he's like, did you just take both pills? And that's kind of what indie hackers do, at least for several years, before they actually get enough, money to be ramen profitable. So that's kind of my view on that. So what's next? My hypothesis is that the best hand for me is back-end software engineering at a company I like with tiny projects on the side. I came to this conclusion by rethinking a few things. The first is, what's the point of business? At the end of the day, it's to make money to support your life. Previously, I was trying to make my career, the thing I did for money, also be the impact/purpose of my life. This is unhealthy and destined to fail as incentives are not aligned. If I no longer need to get fulfillment out of my job and projects, then I can focus on doing things that actually fit the way I want to work and find balance and purpose in the rest of my life, which sounds like a much better path, when you say it out loud. This seems like a more sustainable and attainable strategy. The next is, what do I like doing? At the end of the day, I like to build systems. Systems for myself, systems of accomplishing things, systems that are interesting. Software was never really the end goal. It was and is just the best way I found to build most systems. And finally, what leads to a fulfilling life? Knowing that, what can I do in business to promote it? So I've done a lot of research into this externally and internally via my own reflections. The best resource on this I've found is 80,000 hours, 80,000 hours being like approximately the number of hours you have that will be spent at whatever job or profession you choose. They basically found that most job satisfaction comes from three things. The first is work that you're good at. The second is work that helps others. And the third is supportive conditions and really the lack of pressing negatives. So, if you're doing work you're good at and work that helps others, but, your boss and team are like jerks, that's not going to be a good fulfilling fit for you. And when we put these together, we basically, hand-wavingly back ourselves back into the hedgehog principle, which is essentially work you can get paid for and that has supportive conditions, work you're good at, and work you're interested in. And I reposted this tweet because I thought it was telling, and it came at, the time I was thinking about all these things. This is from Dan Rowden, who is a solo entrepreneur, was able to make it ramen profitable, has a lot of different businesses. But this take I thought was fun is, interestingly, probably the easiest way for an indie hacker to get to their desired monthly revenue is to get a job. That's kind of, the conclusion that I came to as well. So looking at this, the answer for me was pretty obvious. Software engineering better fulfills these buckets for me than anything else that I can currently think of. So the first bucket, work you can get paid for and that has supportive conditions. Software engineering is currently one of the highest paid professions on the planet, and until recently has been considered one of the cushiest, though, we'll see with all the current job market turmoil. So this is fulfilled. And looking back like 6 months afterwards, it's still pretty high paid, maybe not as high paid as it used to be, and maybe not quite as cushy with all return to office, but still pretty good, all things considered. The next bucket is work you're good at. So I'm often told I'm a bit of a narcissist, and that is probably true. But I also like to think I'm very honest, especially about things that I'm bad at. Software engineering is not one of them. I'm pretty good at systems, and that means I'm pretty good at building software. So this one's fulfilled. Work you're interested in. If I pick a company that has a product/impact that helps others, has problems I like solving, building systems, and solves a problem I have some direct experience with, then this is probably fulfilled. Because I'll be interested in solving it, interested in the outcomes, and actually interested in doing the work that, leads to those. So this makes me think that software engineering provides a pretty good balance for me. It's not perfect, but it's the best play I've found so far. Entrepreneurship going forward. So now this is me skipping ahead from when I wrote that section back in July to today, end of 2023, looking back and showing how things have changed. So fast forward several months and I'm working as a software engineer at Rippling, an HR scale-up. I'm pretty happy and the work has been pretty fulfilling. Looking back on my journey so far, there are glaring issues with my approach to entrepreneurship this past year, both part-time and full-time, but that's hindsight. You often don't see the mistakes until after you've done them, and I certainly didn't. What I did ultimately learn is that for me, it's very important how the work gets done, not just what we're doing and why. If we do the work in a way that is not supportive or conducive to me doing my best work in a way that interests me, then it won't be very fulfilling and I'll eventually quit or just decide to do something else. The simplest scalable system I've found to model work and projects that I will be into and fulfilled by, short and long term, is really just Hedgehog. So something the world wants and will pay for, something that I'm good at, and something that I'm interested in. If it fulfills those things, I'll probably have a decent time doing the thing and be pretty good at it. If it doesn't, it's probably not the right project for me. And if it's not for me, I should figure out a way to avoid it so I can instead work on something better. Now, I'm sure that there'll be some naysayers out there who'll probably be like, grow up, the real world doesn't work that way. Sometimes you need to do things you don't enjoy. To which I would respond to these imaginary detractors that you're probably right. There are infinite things to do and a finite time energy with which to do them. So you might as well just do the things you enjoy. Seems like a better strategy. Now, this is just a hypothesis, so of course I'm experimenting with putting these learnings into practice. So far it's worked out pretty well, but I've been running this experiment for less than a year and only have small n data, so we'll just have to see. What I can tell you is that overall I've been happier and more energized with the projects I've chosen that check all these boxes. Anecdotally, this has led to better work on my end, and I think better outcomes overall for the projects that I've chosen. Now, I'll note that these projects definitely aren't global maxima for impact. I could probably have way more impact focusing on different projects that max for those, but since I wouldn't actually follow through on those long term, I think this approach more reliably maximizes for my impact over time and my enjoyment of the journey, which is kind of all that matters at the end of the day. So yeah, I think if you were to think of like a triangle kind of thing and like the projects in there and it's like, how much impact does it have? How much are you good at it? How much are you interested in it? And we just maxed out for the things of impact. It's probably going to be like, I don't know, some charity thing or some like deep science or something like that. But like those things like help the world, but I don't know if my kind of software engineering and systems building that I like to do like really match up with that. So it feels like I wouldn't be too interested in actually doing the work required. And so even though working on this has like the max impact, because I'm not that interested in it, I'll probably not be doing my best work for it. And so I'm kind of under leveraged doing this thing. Whereas if I focus on something that kind of fits the triangle better in all dimensions, we'll probably do better work overall. And so, each one individual of those will probably not have, the max impact possible, but each of those will be done better and probably faster and in a way that's like more leveraged to my own skills. And so over time, as I output more of these projects in the form of these triangles that I'm better leveraged to do, I think that leads to better impact overall as a sum of all those things, and especially as a sum of those things that would not have happened otherwise if we focused on like triangle projects that were worse for us. Yeah, that's my hypothesis. And so here's some examples of me kind of doing this and putting this into practice. So in my business domain, basically my action has been, I'm going to try to focus on 3 business milestones a week that matter at Rippling and in my role. And then I'm going to give myself 1 tech milestone that I can work on. So this is optional. I don't do it every week, but basically it's like an investigation or a project or an idea I'm interested in. And so it's like, do the things that the business wants, but then, hey, go play around and do something else. And the outcome so far has been like exceeding grades and kind of what the business cares about, but also doing all sorts of other things that are kind of pushing the company and the software forward while enjoying the work. So like examples of this is like, we're doing this thing and there's some tech debt that I noticed that like is causing a bunch of failures. Like fixing that up is probably not part of the main work. But it really helps out with the business. And as you get more senior, I think this idea of like following the impact, not just what the business wants or thinks it wants, is what actually leads to much more outsized impact over time. Been more excited about it, been making more projects and still, being pretty fulfilled and in the process. Next one is tech. Which is where I kind of just play around with tech anyway. And so my action is really just do like 1 exploration a week, focus on whatever I'm interested in at the time. So this might be like projects, might be like, curious about this thing, let me go investigate it and write it up. Kind of anything I'm interested in. And the outcome of this kind of focused on just playing around versus like, I don't know, trying to hit something that I set up a few months ago or an opportunity in the market I see, is that I built a lot more projects and had a lot more fun doing it. So I built about 7 in the last 2 months. Which are like kind of officially released as part of my HAMY Labs project repo. And a ton more that I've just played around and maybe made it into a share, like I haven't even shared about, but just been having more fun with it, led to more projects actually built and released that I liked. The other domain I have in Create is shares. So like this one that I'm reading off today. And my action for that is just 1 share a week. Kind of just focused on whatever I want to talk about. So sometimes I have some ideas that I might want to do. Sometimes I don't. And some weeks I just don't feel like it, especially like for traveling or something. I'm like, yeah, whatever, who cares? So sometimes it's nothing, but I found that I actually like to talk and write, especially in this format. It's much easier for me than previous formats I've tried. So I basically never have a week where I haven't made something. Even if I don't make it that week, it's been scheduled. And so the outcomes are that like, even today I've got posts scheduled out for the next month because I've just had so many that, I wouldn't post them in a week. It would have to like be next month before posting them is reasonable. And it kind of feels fun just making these. So I think that's like a total win overall. And so all of this is to say that I haven't exactly stopped entrepreneurship in the sense that I'm still discovering problems and opportunities and solving for the ones with the highest opportunity for me. In fact, you could largely argue that I'm doing this more and better than I was before. But what I did stop doing is chasing the false dream of entrepreneurship, the rags to riches story of if you work super hard for long enough, you will eventually make it. That story is not true. I think it's even dangerous. Most entrepreneurial ventures fail, so if you wreck yourself pursuing one, then you've essentially wrecked yourself across all future opportunities. And we call this ruin. At least that's what Dan Visayo calls it, is ruin. And I think that's probably a better term for it, is basically if you bankrupt yourself here in the first thing, then like you're now setting yourself up for failure for all future ones, because now you got to get out of debt. Now you got to do all this other stuff. And so we want to avoid this. And there are better approaches that optimize for median outcomes, allowing you to both live a good life and make small bets for outsized returns and impact without wrecking or ruining yourself. And what this means is if you can continue making these small bets over time, that you're basically staying in the game longer and you have a higher chance of finding one that will actually work. So instead of like planting one seed and hoping it's going to turn into like the biggest pumpkin or whatever, how about we plant a field of seeds and we do that for many years, then it's much more likely that we're going to find one that like turns into a big pumpkin. But if you ruin yourself buying the perfect seed and that seed for whatever reason doesn't work, like now you can't plant the other pumpkins. Like that's, it's a law of numbers. It's just math. And so we should not glorify unnecessary and self-imposed hardship. I get so mad at companies and metrics and people when they do this, because I feel like it's so just not the right thing. It's like the value system is totally on its head. And I think we should all remember that time and effort is not what matters. Doing 80 hours a week is meaningless if all you're doing is like staring at your screen or sending emails or whatever else is like not the most important thing. And I would also posit that anything over 50 hours a week regularly, 60 hours every now and then, if there's like a breakage or like, a thing's coming up, is actually net negative, because like those extra hours you're spending, one, you're doing terrible work. You're probably making mistakes. So even if it feels fine now, it's going to bite you in a few weeks. And two, you're like burning off like your reserves and your battery. And so you're going to be doing worse work, and you're not helping yourself rest for the next day. And so you're probably causing problems for yourself, for your life, and it's not helpful. And so anytime I see people like saying that they're working super hard, over 50 hours regularly, or 60 hours kind of like more than once or twice a year, I'm like, you're doing the wrong thing to get the outcomes you want. It's like hurting you and everyone and the project that you're on and your life. Like it's just bad. Don't do this. Don't do this. So what can we do instead? So instead of this, I think we should instead focus on impact and support each other to make better decisions in pursuit of our goals for life. My way of doing this is telling you to not make the mistakes that I made. Don't do this, because it's not worth it, and it's not actually helpful in basically all cases to get what you want. And so I really like this saying, like, real artists don't starve. Because when you think about it, like if you're an artist and you're not making money to support yourself, like, are you an artist? And it's like, yeah, you can be an artist, but you need to live to be art, to make art, to be an artist. And so the first and most important thing is always to like be able to support yourself, to live. And so real artists, they don't starve. They're somehow making a living so that they continue to make the art. That's the goal, Art for the sake of art, but you got to live to make the art. And so in the same way, real entrepreneurs don't starve either. So if you're in a way that's kind of what they call like, default dead, if you are living a life that's unsustainable, you're like starving yourself to be an entrepreneur, you're not doing it right. You got to do something so that you can support yourself being an entrepreneur long term, so that you can do the work, that you can do the art. And, further, real businesses are profitable. So if you are building a business that is also unsustainable, that is starving, you're starving yourself to make this business that is also starving, you're not doing it right. We got to find more sustainable ways to do this. And, this is a big reason why VCs are often a pit of failure, is because they create a lot of zombie businesses that are not profitable. So it's not really business. Okay, that's it. A long-winded summary of my entrepreneurial journey so far, and especially this past year. Nowadays, I'm but a simple technomancer building things I find interesting. You can explore a mostly complete list of my projects on my projects page here. And if you like this post, you might also like this post on kind of heuristics you can use to stop wasting your time on bad startup ideas and figure out if you are wasting your time so you can stop wasting your time. Your programming language benchmark is wrong on how we measure things very precisely, but using the wrong measures, and kind of leads us into another pit of failure. And if you're just curious, I have a little summary of my career as a software engineer so far, and you can check out here. This has been a long one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.